Welcome, everybody, to a new feature on Macklin's Take called Boxing Book Club. So, Boxing Book Club is something that I actually started on Twitter during lockdown, probably last May, June time, something like that. We were all looking for things to do at that point, ways to pass the time. And I thought, what better way, really, than to get stuck into some reading, because there are just so many great books and articles that have been written about the sport of boxing over the course of the last 100 years. It's just such a rich treasure trove of entertainment. So I remember one Sunday just putting out a video just recommending three books that I've read, that I've got, and asking other people for their recommendations. And it was great. It turned into exactly what I hoped it would be, which is just fellow enthusiasts getting together, having a chat, recommending books. People would ask each other for books on certain subjects, about certain fighters, about certain periods during boxing history. And everybody was just more than willing to come back with ones that they got, that they'd read, where you might be able to find them, all sorts of things. It was brilliant. And at no point did it descend into any kind of dick waving, for want of a better phrase, about, oh, my bookcase is bigger than your bookcase. And I do understand the irony of that, given that I choose to do my podcast sitting in front of my boxing bookcase. But I think it's an okay choice to do that. It's a more interesting backdrop than the other side of my study, which basically sees me sitting in front of a mounted radiator, which makes it look like I'm sitting on the floor. So I am aware that I'm sitting in front of my own collection. But having said that, I know loads of people who've got way bigger book collections than me. So like I say, that's not what this is about. And it was great to see people actually buy some books for the first time on boxing. People who've been boxing fans but hadn't really read too much about it. And people were sending each other messages backwards and forwards about the ones they got and all the rest of it. I probably bought about 25 different titles over that period that I hadn't heard of and that I hadn't read, and just really enjoyed it. So I'm going to be doing this, I think, pretty much every Sunday for the foreseeable, and we'll see how it goes. Again, just get involved in the comments on Twitter, get involved in the comments on YouTube, and let's just have some fun with this. And if people enjoy it, then I think I might look to invite the odd author on to talk about how you go about writing a book, how you source your material, how you deal with difficult interviewees or people who don't really want to be interviewed, deadlines, word counts, all of that, not just the boxing side of it, but the professional authorship of it too. Because I've never done it. I've never done it myself. And I just think it'd be a real interesting thing. And to get a few people on, a few authors on too, to talk about their favorite books. So I'll kick us off with three for this week. Two of these were ones that I had recommended to me in the last round of Boxing Book Club. So the first one is this one there we go. Let's make sure we get that nicely on the camera. In the red corner, A Journey into Cuban Boxing by John Duncan. Cuban boxing is something which I just find endlessly fascinating, really. John Duncan he left his job as a journalist at the Guardian in the 90s and went off to Cuba, ostensibly to try and arrange a fight between Felix Savon and Mike Tyson. And Frank Warren gave him a few pound notes and off he went. And it's a very entertaining book about his trials and tribulations and ups and downs doing that. He got right into the heart of the Cuban amateur system, and it's a journey kind of like no other. I'm not going to go into huge depth when I recommend these books, because I want you to find out for yourself. But this is a really great read. It's really funny in places, and just enormously just full of great detail. And it really does make you feel like you get an understanding of what that great Cuban machine was all about, all its quirks and its intricacies and idiosyncrasies. It's really good. You don't have to be bang into the amateurs or into Olympic boxing to enjoy this. You'll like it, whatever your interest in whatever your specific interest in the sport is. So my next one is a recent release. This is called The Super Fight. It's topical, really, because the Super Fight, of course, was between Marvelous Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard, and Hagler has passed away recently. We were all very sad to see that happen because he was a true legend, a true great of the sport. Now, this book is written by Brian Dugan. Me and Matt, you might remember, had Brian on the podcast last year, about last October, I think, before the book was released, just to talk about it. And he's done a great job with it because he traces the two careers through. He kind of takes their careers through up until the fight, and then you talk about the fight and then the fallout from the fight. So even though it centers in on one fight, that really is the kind of the focal point, but it's not just what the book is about, not by any stretch. You really get into the journeys of those two fighters. He talks to lots of different people, gets lots of different perspectives and angles on it. It goes into great detail. The research is tremendous. And of course, it was one of those fights involving two of the four kings that we saw so many of during the 1980s. And if you're a fan of either fighter, which I'm sure you all are, I don't think there's any of us who aren't, and of that era, again, I don't think there's any of us who aren't, then you'll really enjoy this because, as I say, it's just a really well-researched, well-done book and a great subject. So I would urge you to have a look at that. My third one, again, this is a book that was recommended to me last year during the first round of Boxing Book Club, and I'm just trying to make sure I don't get the light too much on that. Tarnished Armour by Dominic Calder-Smith. And this is a book about the heavyweight scene in the 1990s. And the heavyweight scene in the 1990s, I think, is just one of the best decades for heavyweight boxing. Other people might argue that the quality wasn't as good as it had been in previous decades and in previous eras and all that kind of thing. And yes, possibly so, but there were lots of great characters around. There were some extraordinary things that happened in the 1990s. Absolutely mind-boggling when you think about how it started with Buster Douglas beating Tyson, how it ended with Lewis beating Holyfield, Riddick Bowe, and the trilogy with Holyfield, George Foreman coming back onto the scene, the Fan Man, the bite fight, Riddick Bowe chucking his WBC belt in the bin, the WBO title, which really took on a life of its own, had a really interesting journey as a kind of, I would say a kind of subplot really to the main crowns of the WBC, WBA and IBF at that point. And I just remember it well because 1990 to 2000 took me from 12, 13 to 22, 23 years old. And I remember it all vividly. So that's a great book. You know, I've absolutely loved reading that, Tarnished Armour. So there's no way you won't enjoy that. Absolutely no way. So those are my three, just to kick us off. I'll just remind you again, in the red corner by John Duncan, The Super Fight by Brian Dugan, and Tarnished Armour by Dominic Calder-Smith. So if you were aware of Boxing Book Club the first time around, then just get involved again, because there'll be loads of books that you would have missed. There'll be loads. And if this is your first exposure to it, I hope you enjoy it and just get involved in the way that I suggested. Because we're all the same here. We're all boxing fans. We all like reading about boxing. Reading is something that will never become old-fashioned or out of fashion or obsolete. Some things are just good and always will be. And reading about sports, and particularly the sport of boxing, will always be one of them. It just sparks your imagination. It can kind of take you back to a place. It can spark memories if you were in a place, but even if you weren't. And I'll get on some books in the coming weeks about bygone eras where, you know, none of us were present. And it can just conjure up these vivid images of what was going on at the time because of the quality of the writing, and the skill of the writers. So I firmly believe that reading will always be cool. And again, I do kind of appreciate the irony of me saying this on YouTube, which is a very kind of modern visual media, but I believe completely that all of these things can exist alongside each other. I don't frown upon new media. I wouldn't describe myself as old school. I like to stay up to date with whatever's going on. And I don't see any reason why all of these different platforms, all of these different methods of communicating information, of telling stories, there's a place for all of them. They can all exist alongside each other. It doesn't mean that one's going to replace the other, because anything that's good will endure. That's the way I've always looked at it. And books, I will never not want to have books. Kindle's great. It saves a bit of space, but I like having physical things. I like holding a book in my hand and being able to fill up a bookcase so that I can put it as my backdrop for my podcasts. But a good library, when you walk into a good library and you just see shelves and shelves of books, you just think, wow, like this is amazing. I do anyway. Okay, so I'll wrap it up there. It won't be as long, probably, usually, this little feature, but I just thought I'd take a bit more time today to explain it, because not everybody will be aware of us doing it the first time around. But just let me know what you think of it. And if there's a demand, like I say, I'm happy to try and get authors on and try and, get people who you would want to hear from, because they are generally pretty generous with their time. So that's it. That's it for this week, for the first week of Macklin's Take Boxing Book Club. Over and out.